Wazy. Those of you who are wondering what these are, this refers to our September. Every year I go to the major sites in Poland, what used to be Germany, East Prussia. We take a group of about 20 or 30 citizens from the United States, mostly about half from America and the rest from England, France, Australia, everywhere. We visit these historic sites, which are still there, buried in the forest, if you know where to look. But this may well be the last time I come to the United States, for the simple reason that when I landed in Atlanta on January the 31st, I was detained for 4 hours by Homeland Security on a pretext, and then my passport was seized, and the 10-year visa was cancelled, so they can stop me coming at any time they want at the drop of a hat. I had previously a 10-year visa, which made it much more difficult to stop me coming in, and I was very careful to adhere strictly to the visa terms and conditions. But the first bench when I came in on January 31st, the guy there said he knew everything. He said, yeah, you're speaking in Orlando and Clearwater and Portland and Atlanta and everywhere, aren't you? And you're speaking about this man, G. I say Goebbels, yes. Yeah. He said, how much are you earning for this? Who's paying you? And I said, nobody. I'm not allowed to earn money. I can't. On the University of Denver, when I spoke there, sometimes they wanted to pay me a fee, and I said, I can't accept a fee. I can accept expenses, but I can't accept a fee. So they gave up, and then I was put back in the cell and held for another hour, and then they now tried another tack. They said, last time you were here, you overstayed your visa. I said, no, I didn't. Very careful not to. They said, yes, you did. I said, when are you talking about? They said, well, you landed on January 31st last year, and you left on July 31st, and you're only allowed to stay 6 months. I said, duh. January 31st to July 31st is 6 months. No, it's 6 months and 1 day, by State Department reckoning. Is it? Not by my calculation. Not if you rent a car, not if you stay in a hotel. 31st to 31st is exactly a month. And you're paying the same whether it's a long month like 31st or a short month like February. But no, they said 1 day overstayed, and for that your visa is going to be cancelled, which they then immediately did and fined me $800 cash. And out of the generosity of their hearts, they then gave me a temporary visa. They said, as you've entered it illegally. I said, no, I didn't. I entered legally. You have made it illegal by cancelling the visa since I entered. So when I entered, that visa was legal. Anyway, since you entered. So that, you can see which way they're going. Next time they've now cancelled the visa, and next time I apply for a visa, it will be found that I've violated a previous visa, overstayed, and for that there's a 10-year automatic ban from returning to the United States. And I think that's what may happen. So forget about the First Amendment. It's not because I polished my shoes the wrong colour, or because I've got 10 speeding tickets that I've not paid or anything. It's because certain people contacted the State Department and said, stop him coming. And the mistake I did make, of course, was to announce my coming a month ahead with all the cities I was going to be visiting, so they knew exactly where I was going, and the enemy knew, and the enemy then put pressure on whoever's put pressure on. They're quite disconcerting, and I won't know what's going to happen until I go back to the US Embassy in England and apply for another visa, and I find out what the response is. The visa is very hard to get. It took me, when I came out of prison in Austria, it took 3 years to get a visa because of that.
How did you travel to Canada then?
How did I travel to Canada?
Well, how has it been?
It's banned. I've been banned from Canada since 1992.
Oh, where are you? Okay.
As witness what happened on October the 15th last year. I took a cheap ticket from Expedia, a one-stop flight. One-stop flight going back. The plane stops from Atlanta to London. The plane stops in Washington, D.C. Flying out from London to Atlanta, the plane stopped in Canada, in Toronto. I don't mind, because when you do a transit like that, you're not actually landing in the country, you're going through the transit zone. And all was well until we landed in Canada. The plane landed in Toronto and rolled up to the terminal, and I got an onward flight in 1 hour's time from the next gate. And as we rolled up to the terminal, the loudspeakers of the plane crackled and a message came over the plane loudspeaker saying, ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed by ground control. Today, unusually, passport control will be affected at the exit door of the plane. How often does that happen? But of course, that effectively advanced the border of Canada right up to the doors of the plane. So as I stepped off the plane, there were 10 Canadian border police waiting for me with a weapons drawn, having been told to wait for Mr. Irving, because as they told me, they said a message had come across the Atlantic while the plane was mid-Atlantic. A message had come across advising Canada that I was on the plane. So instead of being taken to the next gate and escorted to the onward flight to Atlanta, so that Canada remained safe, I was held there for 3 hours in detention and put on the next plane back to London overnight. So after 3 brief hours in Canada, I was back where I started off that morning. There was my housekeeper waiting for me with the car, baffled, puzzled, wondering why it had happened. I know why it had happened, and I don't blame the Canadians. I blame the people behind Canada. Just the same as I don't blame the United States. I don't even blame Obama for what goes wrong in this country with all the wars you're being dragged into. I blame the people behind the United States government. They're the ones who do it. And it's unfortunate because at least a lot of people being killed, which is a lot more inconvenient than just being held in detention for a few hours and having to buy yet another transatlantic ticket, so ending up $1,000 out of a ticket before the tour even begins. You don't know this happens because it's not in the newspapers. If I am finally banned from the United States, then it will be in the newspapers, and I'm sure bloody well it gets in the newspapers, and the flimsy pretext that they've cooked up, this one-day overstay, allegedly. I mean, whoever heard of it being 1 day over if you leave on exactly the same day of the month as you enter on? It's baffled me. I was very confident that I had. Anyway, there we are. And they've got it all wrong anyway, because they should be supporting me and pouring more money into me, these people, because I'm doing half their dirty work for them. I'm not a revisionist. I'm not an extreme revisionist. You'll hear during my talk. So my views are probably pretty mainstream, but they're better considered. I don't just repeat. I don't just parrot what I've been told. There we go. Now comes the change.
Do you have any friends?
Hmm?
Do you have any friends in the United
In the United States, 7,800 on my list. It's not bad, is it?
What about the American left? Are there people on the internet?
They are constantly badgering me to do their broadcasts on their web radio stations, and that's the last thing I would do. If I do that, then I can forget about ever coming back to the United States. Oh yes, that kind of thing.
It's a controlled media.
No, but if you do anything off Broadway like that, then you're really asking for trouble. You have then become a really loose cannon, and it's. I mean, it's not illegal, but it's on the fringe. Okay. So what I'm going to be talking about today is sources more than anything. Do I have sources here? I even saw them. I carry this box around. It's my box of tricks. Oh, yes.
She's coming back.
Is she coming back? Just so you know, those of you who want to buy anything, we take cash, checks, credit cards, and promises to pay. Yeah. Normally I got that out on the table. Can you put that on, just lay it on top? Let's load up here. I carry these documents around with me. And as I showed that to you, every September we do this tour. And the first 4 days of the tour this year, which is I think September the 2nd to the 10th or thereabouts. The first 4 days we're visiting the 4 Reinhardt sites in Poland, Operation Reinhardt, which is a very ugly operation indeed. It's where all the killing took place. Forget about Auschwitz.
Where do you meet for those? Where do you meet for those tours?
Warsaw. Our guests make their own way to Warsaw International Airport, and from that moment on we pay everything and take care of everything. But it's the main airport in Warsaw. It's only a few miles outside the capital. You come straight away from the airport in Warsaw, which is called the Frederick Chopin Airport, named after the composer. It's the main international airport in Warsaw. And then we take you straight to a 5-star hotel in the center of Warsaw, which is our base. I'm not going to mention the name because I'm on camera. We keep it very secret, and the hotel management asked us not to broadcast their name around. And the tour starts in that hotel, ends in that hotel, with 20 or 30 very happy guests making their way home afterwards. On the very second or third day of the last tour, last September, 3 of our American guests came out to me separately and said, "Mr. Irving, this is far more interesting than I ever imagined it was going to be." It is fascinating. You visit the Reinhardt sites, which are Belzec, Treblinka, Majdanek, and Sobibor, which you only hear marginally about in the history books, because the conformist historians seem not to know much about them. But we go there and have a look, and you get the feel of the place. We stand on the railway siding where the trains were unloaded. And then we spend the last 3 days visiting the spectacular pyramid-sized bunker headquarters of Hitler and Himmler and the German Army High Command. Huge buildings buried in the forest. The Hitler headquarters is the famous Wolf's Lair. There's pictures of it in this leaflet. That's me just near Himmler's bunker, number 17. Hitler's bunker, rather, had the roof 60 feet thick, 60 feet solid concrete. But of course, they didn't quite understand how bombs work. Our British ground-penetrating bombs would go 30 or 40 feet into the ground and then exploding into the building, so that roof wouldn't really protect the people. But the bunkers are still there. They're cracked. They've tried to demolish them. The Germans tried to demolish them with hundreds of tons of explosives, but things outside reinforced concrete don't break open easily. Some of them have been kind of thrown across the forest and landed upside down elsewhere. Himmler's bunker is 30 miles away. Hochwald, for some reason, his headquarters is outside Hitler's headquarters, connected by a train line, little one single-track train line, which we knew was there. You could see it on the maps. And you knew that he took the train to see Hitler. But we could search that site as much as we wanted. We could see Himmler's bunkers and the other bunkers where they'd been and where they still are. Gigantic things hidden in the forest like Aztec pyramids. You've got to take the right path or you're going to miss it. And then one of my American friends last September came running across the fields towards us saying he had found the embankment, the railway embankment. He got the map the wrong way. They had put the map the wrong way, not with north at the top, and now he had aligned the map correctly, and he found the railway embankment. And sure enough, it's a tall embankment, about 100 feet tall, which runs across that field and past the forest into the distance, and you can see it as a railway embankment. The Poles have obviously stolen all the railway lines, everything. You get the feeling of history, and you can walk inside the bunkers. You have to watch your step. We always take torches with us so you can see in the different rooms. Fascinating. Hitler's bunker was occupied from June 1941 when Operation Barbarossa began against Russia. At Himmler's bunker simultaneously. That's where all the ugly decisions were taken, which I'll be talking about. Except that it seems that Himmler wasn't really involved in many of the decisions. Most of the work was being done by people much lower than him. I spent a lot of time looking at the archives of the KGB. The Soviet secret police. They captured most of the files of Reinhard Heydrich, of the SS, the Gestapo. They're in Moscow. I've got 44 microfilms of them that were given me by one of us, right-winger, Willis Carto. Do you know the name Willis Carto? Yes. Yeah. He paid $500,000 for these microfilms. Not his money, it was given to him by a wealthy donor. He didn't know what to do with them, he couldn't read them, so he gave them to me. I took them doing them, I've had them all digitized. It makes about 300 gigabytes of images. And you read all these very low level, very high level, it's the reports of the people doing the dirty work. And after a time you get this clear image that the reports are just going up about knee high, not going right to the top. And the orders are coming down from about the same level, from about knee high. And very few of the documents are signed by Himmler, or even initialed by him, as haven't been read. In fact, one or two of the documents say there's no need for this to go above a certain level because we understand that they don't want to be involved in this. And I don't think Hitler was told about it either, what was going on. We'll find pretty clear evidence that Hitler was being kept in the dark by Himmler. But before we get on to the results, which is what I'm going to be telling you, those are the results, so to speak. We're also going to be looking at numbers. But we need to know really what my basis for saying these things is. First thing is, you can't believe a Jew, you can't believe a Pole, you can't believe a Romanian or a Hungarian, all these Eastern Europeans. If they talk to you and tell you these stories of what they've seen or what they've heard or what they've listened to, you've got to divide it by 10, basically. They add the color. Every story they tell you is lurid. So you can kind of discount a lot of that. Generals in the witness box at Nuremberg and elsewhere, you've got to discount a lot of that too. If I was a German general in the witness box at Nuremberg giving evidence, my primary concern would be to make sure that noose didn't end up around my neck, but went securely around somebody else's neck. So a lot of the time you're going to disregard what is said in the witness box at Nuremberg by generals or other high-ranking officers, putting the blame on somewhere else, shifting the blame. Is there any evidence you can rely on? Well, there's two categories of documents I'm going to talk to you, and I'll show you some of them, that I think are the equivalent of pile driving into a swamp, driving piles. When you're writing history or reading history, you're basically wading through a deepening swamp. You're sinking in on top of your ankles, then up to your knees, and then heaven help me, you're up to your thighs, and you're in danger of being sucked right in by history. And it's a swamp. There's no firm ground once you've left the shore until you come to these documents, which are top state secret, on the German files and to the British files, the highest classification of security. Two groups of papers in particular in the British archives, and I'm an expert in the British archives as far as this is concerned. Two groups of papers are particularly significant. Those German generals that are giving evidence in the witness box, suppose instead of hearing them give evidence in the witness box before their enemy judges, suppose you heard them talking to each other in private. Well, that's what we've got. After years of fighting wars in Britain, we realized that how to get intelligence out of your prisoners, out of your captives. You haven't learned yet in America. In America, you think what you do, you beat them up, you drag their fingernails out, you do everything you accuse the enemy of doing, and then you waterboard them, and that doesn't work, and then you listen to what they tell you when they're in fear of being drowned, and of course, any poor bastard is going to tell you what he thinks you want to hear, once the water's up to his neck. And we don't do that. We're rather like the Gestapo. The Gestapo also used very clever psychological methods of getting information out of people. The chief of the Gestapo, deputy chief of the Gestapo, the right-hand man to Reinhard Heydrich, was Werner Best. He was a lawyer. Most of the people I'm going to be talking about today were lawyers, German lawyers with legal degrees, law degrees, doctorates in law. Werner Best, he said in a post-war manuscript, he said the way we found out to get information out of our prisoners in the Gestapo wasn't to beat them up. That very rarely happens. It happens in the Hollywood movies. It didn't actually happen in real life. We'd put two prisoners in separate rooms. We give them a pad of paper and a pencil and say, write down what happened. Each of them. And then we compare the two versions, and then we'd say, we've got a bit of a problem. Your version doesn't agree with his version. Now, what actually happened? And within half a day, they found out what actually happened, without anybody getting, without a single black eye. We did the same. We took them to England, the prisoners, during the war and after the war. These generals, the SS generals, the army generals, admirals, took them to England, brought them ashore in England and to demoralize them. We also made absolutely sure that they weren't taken through any part of England that had seen any war damage. They brought ashore, they were taken through quiet country lanes, through undamaged towns, until by the time they got to the final mansion where they're going to be held, they're seething with rage at the lies they've been told by Berlin about the damage that we've been doing to the British Empire. And it turns out there's no damage at all, not a single street pub, everything is still intact. We've seen it. They've driven us through these towns, nothing damaged. And they're brought finally to this beautiful country mansion in southern England, Buckinghamshire or Berkshire, and they're treated like gentlemen. They're allowed to wear their uniforms. There's a field marshal or a colonel general. They're allowed to keep their weapons. They're allowed to keep their medals. And they introduce their old pal, Fred, Heinz, wie geht's? I've had the most extraordinary things happening. I'll tell you about it, but somewhere where we can talk in private. So they go somewhere where they can talk in private. They sit on a park bench outside under a tree. They go inside and sit in their private drawing rooms. Every ventilator, every light bulb has a hidden microphone. Every tree, every bench has a hidden microphone. And this building was called the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center, the CSDIC. I got about 700 of the CSDIC reports back in 1960, 65, thereabouts. I went to see Hugh Trevor Roper, one of Britain's most illustrious, capable historians. I say that even now. Professor Hugh Trevor Roper, he wrote the book called The Last Days of Hitler. He knew these people. He was a great historian, but he was also a British intelligence officer. He served throughout the war in MI6, British secret intelligence. So he had a lot of these transcripts of what these prisoners have been saying to each other, the so-called CSDIC reports, which are stamped top secret. Now they're stamped most secret, which is the highest British classification of security, because for the simple reason that it is a violation of the Geneva Convention to eavesdrop on prisoners of war. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to waterboard them either, but that hasn't stopped the Americans. Well, we listened in on these prisoners of war, although it was illegal, and in the other half of the mansion there were secret rooms with all the listening posts and the special recording machines recording the conversations, and teams of Germans and British recording, writing down everything these people had said. Every whispered word was heard and translated magnificently. Every slang word used by the infantrymen that was understood by the emigre Germans who were working for us. They wrote all these wonderful reports. And because they didn't think, or probably forgot that they were being listened into, they'd probably been trained not to accept. They'd almost certainly been told that the British will listen to what you're saying, so watch what you say. After a time they couldn't resist talking to each other. about the good old times, about what they'd done, what they'd seen, things that the British must never find out about. April 1945, we hear General Walter Bruns talking, an Army Corps of Engineers, just a regular German army, a general. Back in November 1941, he was a colonel in some pioneer unit, based safely in Riga, in the rear areas, in the Riga, capital of Latvia, way far north. And he's talking with fellow prisoners about what he's seen in Riga. He says one morning, he says, I remember clearly, it was the last Sunday in November 1941. That's November the 30th, I know the date. The last Sunday, he said, I remember clearly, one morning, none of my Jews turned up for work. After a time, got tired of waiting for them. I phoned the local SS guy who was in charge of that detachment and asked what had happened to my Jews, why they weren't there turning up for work for me. These tame Jews, and the SS guy, and he says to his fellow prisoners, the young guy, he was in his 20s, Altmaier was his name, the SS guy, I'll never forget his name, Altmaier. He said, that's the way the transcripts, they absolutely recorded every word that was said. He said, oh, you want to know what's happened to your Jews, do you? He said, I'll tell you what, go 5 miles down the road towards Dvinsk, Duneburg, and you'll see what's happening to your Jews. That's how good these conversations are, these top secret reports. It's an eyewitness. He's not trying to save his own neck, he can't keep a secret any longer what he's seen. He says, so I took a handful of my officers and we got a truck and we drove down the road 5 miles. And there on the left-hand side of the road, in the forest, a little place called Rumbula, Rumbula. There was a clearing, and Jews were being driven up there, in a very large number, being made to undress. All their possessions would be put in different cases. Then they're made to climb down into pits. 3 trenches have been dug out, about 2 or 3 trenches, about 25 yards long. They're made to lie down, their heads towards the middle, like sardines in a tin, so that saves space. So very interesting that he says that, sardine fashion, because that was actually the phrase used by SS General Jekyll when he devised this method of packing victims into a trench. Getting them lie with their heads towards the middle, shoulders to get shoulder to shoulder, and then 10 or 12 regular troops, German or Latvian, shooting them with one shot in the back of the neck. Very interesting is because this kind of description gives us a basis that we can do calculations on, because this, if you look in Wikipedia, Rumbula, R-U-M-B-U-L-A, you'll find this is the biggest massacre of the war. Yes, you can write it down, Rumbula. You'll actually see it on Google Earth Maps. You'll see that it's now a little monument there, because there's 3 pits still there. And Wikipedia says this was the biggest single massacre of the war, where 28,000 Jews were killed. The biggest single episode of that part of the war. Well, that number is a huge, gross exaggeration. How we can do the math, well, I'll come back and tell you what I mean by that and how we can do the math. What happened that day, November the 30th? Well, we know, for example, that day SS General Jekyll, who was in charge of the SS in Riga, the chief of police, who was Himmler's viceroy in Riga, he had decided that they were just going to empty out the ghetto that he'd built there, with all the Jews from the city put into that one ghetto behind barbed wire. He was tired of feeding and housing them. He said, I'm going to empty out the ghetto, they're all going to be sent down the road and liquidated. Well, we know there were 4,000 Jews, 4,500 Jews in the ghetto, of whom about 300 managed to escape the events of that day. So you've got a number, a different number.
How many escaped? How many didn't go?
About 300.
Oh.
Managed somehow to escape or not be swept. They passed out at work or something like that. When they came back, they found the whole buildings were empty. But that wasn't all. This was about 2 months into the operation that Hitler himself had ordered, the expulsion of the Jews from Germany. Jews were being loaded onto trains, city by city, Bielefeld, Bremen, Berlin, and shipped off to the east, anywhere to the east, big cities, Riga, Minsk, all the big cities. I've got photographs of that, in fact. The photographs are rather touching. Let's pass them around. Photographs are rather touching. It shows the Jews boarding the trains. Actually, at that time, in December 1941, in other words, the operation's been running already for, I always have to find these things, This is the other thing I'm going to be talking about, volumes upon volumes of decoded SS messages, which I've read all of them, about 1 million of them. Everyone, this is the most crucial document I'm going to be reading, the most crucial decode. I'll put it on one side. We decoded the messages, and they were typed up on flimsy paper, bound into those volumes, 1,000 or 2,000 pages per volume, 43 volumes just of the SS and police messages that we decoded from 1935 to 1939 to 1945. But I mentioned Jews being picked up and boarded on trains, regular passenger trains. This is the regular, what we call slam door passenger trains. You can have that on, pass it around. That's in Bielefeld, a town near Hanover, in Germany. And they're being, you see that, I mean, have a look at the photographs, study it. And you see they look happy. They're wealthy Jews. They're wearing their finest clothes, their Sunday best.
Yeah.
And they're being, look at them leaning out the window like school children going on an outing. And they've got, the only thing that marks it out as being something different is that they're carrying bedding rolls of bedding. And things that, I mean, they're not carrying kind of Wheatoni bags, but they've got all their bags with them because they've been told to take all their finery and all their valuables with them because they're going to a new life. They go into a new life, and it's the ironic thing is, of course, that as you see that photograph, here's the same photograph again. The woman there, the woman with the elegant, you can sit past it again. The woman with the elegant millinery, the elegant hat, and the fine clothes, and leaning out of the window behind her is probably a former Jewish lawyer wearing a trilby hat and his best suit because they've been told to get ready for a new life. They're going to a new life and take everything you've got with you because they're not coming back. And within a day or two they're going to be dead, but they don't know that. In fact, one message we decoded, November the 15th, 1941, is from the Gestapo, the secret state police in Germany, in Bremen, northwest Germany, which used to be an American enclave after the war, in fact, a port. Right. Okay. One of the decodes we have is November the 15th and November the 16th, 1941, from the Gestapo chief, the police chief in Bremen, to Berlin. He says, report today. I report herewith Operation Reinhardt. As to 3 hours ago today, no, 2 days ago, we dispatched one train number DO56. We dispatched this train to Minsk with 937 Jews aboard. And together with 12 regular German police under the command of Police Sergeant so-and-so, 2 lists of names. You know, look at the faces of the Jews there leaning out of the railway carriage, the same one in Bielefeld, happy, smiling, they're like school children going on an outing to a theme park. These photographs are rather touching because, I mean, for Holocaust photographs, you've seen photographs of pits and mysterious propaganda photographs which are possibly true or possibly posed or you don't know what, but this is quite genuine. This is from the German government archives. They began documenting this historic movement of the Jews which Hitler had ordered expelled to the east.
And that was Operation Reinhardt?
It became Operation Reinhardt. Right here. You're asking good questions. This telegram from the one we decoded from Bremen, sent to Riga, ahead, to the police chief in Riga, intercepted by the British. The telegram says, I report herewith that we sent train number DO56 with 937 Jews aboard, 12 regular police escorting them, Police Sergeant so-and-so in command of the unit. On board the train also 2 lists of names of all the Jews concerned. The lists probably provided by the local Jewish community because they collaborated to the hilt with the Gestapo in this. Gestapo, Eichmann himself said we couldn't have done it without the help of the local Jewish community. It would have been chaotic. And on board the train are so many tons of flour, so many tons of cereals, so many gallons of milk, so many thousands of Reichsmarks in currency, bearer bonds, all the foodstuffs they will need and all the appliances they will be needing. Und das nötige Gerät in German, which can only mean appliances. The cobblers are being sent with their last, the tailors are getting their sewing machines, everyone is able to take the equipment they'll be needing in the new life where they're going. And the local Gestapo, the fascinating thing is the Gestapo chief in Bremen reports this to Riga, saying we put it all on board the train for you. They've got enough food, and you can do the maths. Divide 937 into so many tons of cereals and the rest of it. They've got enough food there to last them for 3 or 4 weeks. The first 3 or 4 weeks after they arrive, before they have time to start looking after themselves. And the question I asked myself is, did the Gestapo in Bremen then probably not know what was happening at the other end? Because we know what was happening at the other end, although it only gradually became plain what was happening. So that was mid-November. And from every city in Germany, the postcards, printed postcards, were being delivered to the Jews, ordering the report, to the collecting the assembly points, taking all their valuables, then loaded onto trains and shipped off to the east. I've got several of those postcards. I know how it happened. And a lot of the Jews were quite innocent. They were, innocent as to what was likely to happen to them. Some of them had bad forebodings about it. They know what the Nazis were capable of. 4 trainloads left Berlin by November the 24th. November the 26th, 1941, 4 trainloads of Jews, each of them less than 1,000, which tells us that it's this kind of regular passenger train. The Schindler's List kind of trains carried 5,000 in open trucks, or sealed trucks. So that's a bit of a clue that this was the early stages, and they were being sent third class, non-smoker compartments, as you can see on the door there, third class trains, and they're not particularly apprehensive. They're getting the hell out of Germany and the war and everything. They're going somewhere safe, somewhere different, back east where most of them came from, or their families, being repatriated. A train left Berlin on November the 24th, November the 26th, 1941. And by the night of November the 29th to 30th, they had reached Riga, which is where the ghetto was being emptied the following day. They were held overnight in the sidings on that train. It must be bitterly cold. We know how bitterly cold it was in Riga that night. And the following morning, they are the first 1,000 Jews to be taken down the road to that forest in Umbala and dealt with. So the total number is probably about 5,000. You can do the math. Let me explain what I mean by doing the math. It's the kind of thing that we adults always do all our lives. You know roughly how much gas you're going to put in the gas tank and how much it's going to cost, and oh yes, I've got about enough to cover that. Or you go to a restaurant with a couple of pals, and David Irving being a skinflint, he has something cheap, costing $3.50. He has a girlfriend there, he impresses, so she gets a $17 steak or something, and another hanger-on who's going to spoil the whole evening for them, and he gets something costing about $10. If the waiter then bills you for $150, you know something's gone wrong. Right? He's hoping that you're not going to check. Same as the Jews hope we don't do the math. That's what I mean by doing the math. You don't get out a smartphone and go dot, 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 and how many sines and cosines and logarithms it is. You just do the math roughly in the back of your head. That's what adults learn to do so they don't get cheated. But no one does it with the Holocaust. And I plead with people to do it with the Holocaust because that 28,000 figure for Riga is completely impossible. And we can come at it from 3 or 4 different directions doing the math. And each time it comes up with a number of 4,000 or 5,000, and nothing supports the 28,000. Remember what Bruns said to his fellow prisoner in captivity. He said, when I got down there, he said, there were 2 or 3 trenches had been dug out about 25 yards long. Dot, dot, dot. Wait a minute there. I cross-examined Professor Richard Evans in the Lipstadt trial. He's an expert witness in the witness box. I cross-examined him about this. I said, how many bodies do you think those trenches could have held? How would I know, he said. He's a historian. I said, okay, well, Richard Evans is the historian who didn't know the name of the Nazi ambassador in Paris, Otto Abetz. He didn't know the name of Albert Speer. Oh, who's he? Can you help me? Albert Speer. So you don't expect him to do the math on how many bodies you can get into a pit. It's 25 yards long. We know that they're lying head to head like sardines, so it's probably about 12 feet wide or wider. But, I mean, I said to him, how deep would that pit have been, do you think? Tops. He said, how would I know? Well, I said, well, once again, I had the advantage over you, Professor Evans, of once having worked in construction gangs on building sites. And I know how deep you could dig a trench without having to put up wooden shoring to stop the thing from caving in on you. So let's say you could have dug that trench with sloping sides about 6 feet deep, 2 meters deep, 25 yards long, 4 meters wide. How many bodies can you get in a cubic meter? How would I know? I mean, you give up with this guy. He doesn't have the raw elements for doing the math. Well, the answer is quite simple. You can get about 10 bodies into a cubic meter. Because a human being weighs, say, 80 kilograms. 1 kilogram is 1 liter. We know that because the human body has the same specific gravity, to use a technical term, as water. The specific gravity of 1. That's how the metric system works. So it's going to be about you've got 80 kilograms per body. You've got one cubic meter is 1,000 liters. That's going to be about 12 people tops. Texans, probably about 6 people. But they weren't. I mean, they were skinny. Yeah. I mean, you've got an order of magnitude. You're dealing with orders of magnitude. One thing is quite plain: you cannot get 28,000 bodies into those 3 trenches or 2 trenches, depending on which number of us you believe. You can get 5,000 in. Then it begins to ring true and leave space at the top for backfilling. Then you're looking at the right thing. Just one little simple cross-check calculation that suggests to you straight away, well, 28,000, no, 5,000, possibly. How else? Well, you can look at it another way and say, well, we know that there were 4,000 Jews in the Riga ghetto, and plus 1 trainload of 937 Jews that had the misfortune to arrive that morning. That gives you 5,000, again, same number. And we've got yet another cross-check. You can't shoot in darkness. You can't have your little firing squad lined up along the trench in pitch darkness in the winter, armed with guns, shooting blindly at these people. They've got to do marksmanship. You've got to have the real daylight. And this is winter. This is November the 30th, which is only 3 weeks short of the longest night. And it's in one of the northernmost climes. Riga is up close to much closer to the Arctic Circle than Key West, shall we put. So it gets dark there very, very early in the afternoon, and it's dark until about 9 in the morning. You're going to have usable daylight, say, from 9 o'clock in the morning until about 4:30 in the afternoon. And after that, that's it, chaps, whistle blowing, back to the barracks. So you know exactly how many minutes you've got of usable gun time. And you've got 10 men doing the shooting, 12 tops. You could do 5,000. You couldn't do 28,000. If you're doing 28,000, you'll be doing 1 every 30 seconds. It doesn't work. You've got to have these people. Okay, next. Lie down in the pit. No, square up a bit. Take less space. Lie down. No, it's nasty, but do what I'm telling you. Okay, right. Take aim. Fire. It all takes time. And every hour they change the shift of the shooters. Very interesting that morning. Jekyll obviously realized at the end of that day's operations, or halfway through the day's operations, that things were running too slowly. Because at 11:30 that morning he sends a message to Heinrich Himmler, about 4 lines long. I know what it says. It says, "Dear Herr Reichsführer Himmler, can you get for me 12 of those magnificent Finnish-made submachine guns? The ones with the drum magazines. They will be excellent for my men who are carrying out the special operations. Sonderaktion." I'm not going to argue this. Sonderaktion is quite definitely a euphemism for the killing operations, the special operations. They will be excellent for the men doing that. Because they won't have to keep changing magazines, won't have to keep reloading. We know what gun he's talking about. It's Suomi, the Suomi, well-known Finnish manufacturer submachine gun. I'm talking to gun experts, I know. I've checked up on this particular gun. I think it's the Suomi K31. It had 3 or 4 different magazines. It had this kind of sticks that you shove in with about 10 or 15 rounds in. And it had 2 drum magazines. It had a drum that held 50 rounds and a much bigger drum that held 72 rounds. The gun actually was put on single shot. They just fired 1 shot, well aimed into the back of the neck. Because it was a heavy gun. Very heavy gun with that big magazine on it. And the heavier the gun, the easier it is to do target practice. Because it doesn't jerk, it doesn't kick so much. So that's an interesting telegram. We decoded it. That's how I know he sent that telegram that morning. But it gets much uglier that day. Very interestingly for history. Right? That Berlin trainload of Jews has arrived overnight, been held on the sidings and had the misfortune to be sent straight down to the pits. They're dead by lunchtime. Lunchtime, oddly enough, Hitler's invited Himmler to lunch that day. I know that because I got Himmler's diary and I got Himmler's telephone log. Okay? What's the problem? They're just eating, I think.
Yeah, it's watching it.
Okay. Okay. So you think that's trouble? Who is our spy? Would you like just to go out and have a quick look at them? Size them up. If necessary, I'll just send for the police straight away.
Who are you talking about?
Yep. They're sitting with their back to us with the cap on. Okay. And have they ordered a meal? Okay. So Himmler is that day having lunch with Hitler. I've got his telephone log, Himmler's telephone log. Himmler's telephone log was, in those days, just a blank sheet of paper. He drew a line down the middle of it, and on the top he wrote or typed telephone conversations with the Reichsführer SS. And down the left-hand side he wrote the name of the person that he's speaking on the telephone to at the time. And down the right-hand side, a brief list of the topics of what they discussed. He's a typical manager doing that kind of thing. And this particular day, November the 30th, 1941, Himmler writes a sheet which I've got. I found it. I'm the first person who made use of these telephone notes of Himmler because they're written in this awful Gothic handwriting. Across the top he writes telephone conversations with Reichsführer SS, November 30, 1941. Underneath it he writes aus dem Zug, from the train. He's taking the train from his headquarters to Hitler's headquarters, 30 miles across East Prussia. And then he makes a couple of phone calls. And then the next conversation, which he records from the bunker. No problem? Okay. No problem at all. He's phoning from the bunker. At 1:30 p.m. he telephones Reinhard Heydrich, chief of the Gestapo. And he writes in the notes what he's talking about. The first item is arrested Dr. Jekelius. We know Dr. Jekelius. He's a surgeon in Vienna. His problem was that he had made the mistake of stalking Hitler's sister. He was a stalker. Okay. Women get very upset about stalkers. Women get upset if there are no stalkers. The women get upset. Right? We're going to have to edit that misogynist remark out. Okay.
It's true, though.
It's true, yes. Just like the Jews, they get upset about absolutely everything too. I mean, people send me from all over the world the latest things have upset them. And the next item that he writes, in fact, I think Jekelius didn't survive the war. I don't know what happened to him. The next item he writes is, we've captured the son of Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister, which is also not true. But then comes the interesting thing, trainload of Jews from Berlin, not to be liquidated. Himmler is telephoning Heydrich and he says, trainload of Jews from Berlin, not to be liquidated. And I published that in my book, Hitler's War. It's there in facsimile in the book. And all my opponents leapt on that and said, there you have the proof that Hitler was the one giving that, or he was calling the shots. And I said, no, equally well, he might have been saying, are you out of your tiny mind, Himmler? You're suggesting we just get rid of the Jews, the ones that I'm sending to a new life, and you're suggesting that we can't house and feed them and we just liquidate them when they arrive. You're absolutely bonkers. These are valuable German Jews, not enemy Jews, not Latvian Jews or Soviet Jews. These are valuable people. You send them somewhere else and they can go to carry on doing their works of philanthropy. We don't know what was behind it, in other words. That's the trouble with writing history. You don't get all the dots joined for you. You have to, you're driving piles into the swamp, but there's sometimes quite a gap between the piles. It's a fascinating document because, of course, we know what had happened to that trainload of Jews by the time they're having lunch together that morning. This is the trainload of Jews that arrived overnight and is already dead by the time that Himmler and Hitler are having lunch. And that afternoon, word of the misfortune obviously reaches Himmler. We possibly know how because General Bruns, who had witnessed what was going on in the pits, the one who had been told to go down the road and have a look and see what's happening to your Jews, his conversation continues. He says, when we saw what was going on, we were horrified, and one of us said, someone's got to tell the Führer, Adolf Hitler, what's going on here. And none of us wanted to do that. I mean, it's a strange thing, though, isn't it? Because Holocaust history has it quite plain. Holocaust history makes it quite plain. Adolf Hitler was the madman who ordered the killing of 6 million Jews in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. So what's the point of telling Adolf Hitler what's going on here? Well, obviously these people who knew, that the generals and so on, felt that Hitler was not in the loop. Anyway, they decided the easy way out of this particular dilemma, because they didn't want to go telling Hitler, was to send for a lieutenant. And he was told, they told him, he said, I told one of my lieutenants to go back down the road and write a report on what he was seeing, and come back and give us his written report. And we sent his report up to Hitler's headquarters. Interesting little cameo and insight into the German officer corps mentality. And then gets even more interesting, because he then continues, General Bruns in captivity in Britain, whispering to his fellow generals. He says, and that evening, word came back from headquarters that this kind of mass killing had to stop. Oh. Again, it doesn't fit in with the regular Holocaust story. This kind of mass killing had to stop. What happened? Well, possibly connected with that, possibly not. Himmler, by that time, by mid-afternoon, presumably has found out what happened to his trainload of Jews. And boy, is he going to have to answer to Hitler for that now. And I'm not making this up, because that evening he sends 2 telegrams, code messages, to General Jekon, SS General Jekon, the guy who was in charge in Riga. And the first one says, the operation you carried out in Riga today grossly exceeds the guidelines laid down by myself and Heydrich, Chief of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt. Any such further excesses will be rigorously punished. You are to report to headquarters immediately. Now that definitely doesn't fit in with the Holocaust history. Himmler hearing this and saying, I'm going to punish the guy who's done this. It grossly exceeds the guidelines laid down by me and Himmler, and by me and Heydrich. And it's just possible that this proves that Himmler wasn't entirely aware of the guidelines that Heydrich had laid down, because we got them in the Moscow archives. Heydrich was quite blunt about he wanted the killing to continue and grow by leaps and bounds. He wanted the women and children taken out too. This was Heydrich. So it's possible that Himmler didn't realize that Heydrich had issued rather different guidelines to his own. But the interesting thing for me is the people. I think your NRA in the United States, you have an NRA, and one of their slogans is, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Do you want to do something about the ventilation? Are you picking it up?
I'm picking it up, but I think I'll just have to endure it. I don't know what...
You've got a ventilator behind you. If you just click that off, perhaps that might click the fan off.
It might cause us to be very hot in here, though.
I can take it.
Now to shut it off.
Okay. All right. Let's see what we can do.
Is there an off button on that? Fan off?
It should be off.
We got most of the lights off.
So these decodes are very interesting indeed, and they're on the same, in fact, on a much higher level of reliability than the overheard conversations I was talking about, and infinitely more reliable than some German general waffling in the witness box in Nuremberg, or to interrogators after the war. Because the German generals, the SS, the high-ranking, had not the slightest idea that we were decoding their secret messages. They thought that what they were saying was in absolute secrecy from one man to another, and there was no way that anyone could possibly read these code messages. The Enigma machine, they boasted, produced so many billions of combinations and permutations that no human hand could possibly decode them. But of course we invented the computer, which did it all for us much faster. And within 2 or 3 days of every message being broadcast, our computers had cracked. We invented everything basically in World War. The British, they're clever people. We invented the atom bomb, we invented centrometric radar, we invented the computer, all these things we did. And then we handed like idiots over to the Americans to use. We said we didn't hand over the code breaking machines. That's another story. It led to Pearl Harbor, because the Americans struck back. And because we refused to hand over the secrets of our code breaking machines, the Americans said, in that case, we will not hand over to you the intercepted Japanese messages they were picking up from our listening posts. And we then said to the Americans, in that case, we will not hand over to you our solutions of these decoded messages. And we withheld the 48 most important messages before Pearl Harbor. And I've given the whole of that story based on the exchange of correspondence between Captain Hastings, the head of British intelligence in Washington, and London, where he's reporting this standoff between the Americans and the British secret services, which lasted throughout October and November 1941 until the end of December, by which time it was too late. We had deliberately withheld all the most important messages from the Americans as out of spite. But those are, when you're writing history, of course, those messages are enormously valuable. I've read all 43 volumes of the decoded SS and police messages. And you can understand, you're not reading the whole time vitally important messages. You're working in a collection like that, in a source like that, 99% of what you're reading is chaff. It's unimportant people writing to unimportant people about unimportant events, trivia. A lot of things, messages from the Eastern Front, for example, saying, can you possibly supply for us a new carburetor for a Chevrolet, Captain Chevrolet, we need it, we don't have it in the stocks. Messages of that kind of level. And towards the end of the war, other messages being sent out to the SS units on the Eastern Front saying, we told SS Corporal Müller that in the British terror raid on Munich 2 nights ago, his home in number 26 Heinrichstrasse was leveled to the ground, category C damage, his wife and 4 children are dead. And when you read all those messages, thousands of them, then you appreciate part of the solution to the for me, awesome question of how can you have persuaded the men to do what they were doing? Well, one or two of them actually say privately, and in court after the war, they said, well, on the first day it was difficult. On the second day it was easier. By the time you've been doing it 4 or 5 days, it was just a matter of routine. You didn't pay the slightest attention to what you were doing. Just bang, bang, bang for 1 hour, then you were relieved, somebody else doing the job. The guy came around handing out the fresh ammunition, and you got your lunch break after an hour, and you didn't pay attention. It wasn't human. It wasn't killing anymore. But just for the first couple of days, it was difficult. But Heinrich saw to it. He sent hearsay telegrams, which we decoded, saying the units carrying out special operations make sure they have full alcohol provision in the evenings. Make sure that they have social evenings together in the evenings to help put it behind them, to get it out of their minds, showing movies and dancing and this kind of thing, so they can forget what they've had to do during the daytime, in the hours of daylight. There's one such order sent by. He was a human man. He recognized that you couldn't have a unit doing this kind of thing all day long, week after week after week, without affecting their morale. And so all that was provided for. These are the intercepted messages. And I can see some of you saying, well, what kind of numbers are we actually looking at overall? This is where it becomes unfortunate and very interesting and very important. The short answer is the big number that they quote is probably the right order of magnitude. That's what scientists say. In other words, it's not 10 times too big, it's not 10 times too small. It's probably the right ballpark, the figure. And simple proof of that is this document. I said a decoded document I was going to read to you. Those are decoded messages. I think I got those on. I think this is this one. It's the Höfler telegram. You see the anti-Jewish operations went through, I think, 3 phases, effectively, as far as the East was concerned. The first phase was a very small phase. The invasion of Poland. The police units had orders to round up anybody who was likely to be troublesome, take them to the local churchyard and shoot them. And it was usually the Jews or the communist leaders or Polish intellectuals, people who were too clever for their own good. They were all mixed into one pot and led away and executed somewhere or other, preferably away from eyesight, away from curious onlookers. That was one of the rules: no cameras, no onlookers. And they were dealt with. And their total number, we don't know the numbers there, we know individual operations, a few hundred, which was brought to Hitler's attention, and he didn't get very upset about them, because this was the kind of thing that happens in war. You Americans have probably been doing it in Iraq and Afghanistan without the newspapers covering it. You just get rid of the people who are liable to come up against you a week later as the enemy, with guns in their hands, and you get rid of them in advance, and it's not going to happen to you. But after Hitler invaded Russia, it became much more sinister. 4 army groups plunged eastwards, A, B, C, and D, numbered from the north to the south. Each army group, they were numbered from north to south, but behind each army group came, shall we say, a police group, a task force, Einsatzgruppe, and they were numbered A, B, C, and D from north to south. Einsatzgruppe A was based in Riga, and D ended up based in the Crimea. And their job was to secure the rear areas behind the German armies as they advanced, so the field marshals commanding the armies didn't have to worry about partisan warfare cropping up in their rear, which unfortunately you Americans didn't worry about. You didn't worry about the insurgency until it began. I knew the insurgency was going to come about. It was quite obvious to any experienced observer that Saddam Hussein was preparing for partisan warfare. About a month before the American attack on Iraq, The New York Times reported Saddam Hussein has divided the whole of Iraq up into 12 autonomous regions, each with a military commander capable of giving orders for his own unit. And I said to my friends, he's preparing partisan warfare. He's not going to fight fair and square against the advancing against the advancing Americans, because he knows he hasn't got the strength to do that. He's going to let the Americans win, and then he's going to rise up from the sand behind their backs and do what Stalin did to the Germans. And the proof of that is in my book, Hitler's War. And you'll find that it's no coincidence that the Anti-Defamation League wrote to General Goodpaster, Commandant of West Point, and to the Commandant of Colorado Springs, the American Air Force training units, and to Annapolis, ordering or pleading that all David Irving's books should be taken out of their libraries, especially Hitler's War. And it's no secret, I've seen the letters, I've seen General Goodpaster's cringing replies saying, of course, yes, we'll do that immediately.
But I read that.
Oh, there's the history there of how a dictator is capable of defeating the most powerful military force on earth, namely at that time Nazi Germany. And it's no secret that Saddam Hussein, his number two, Tariq Aziz, according to the Washington Post on April the 28th, 2003, when Tariq Aziz's palace in Baghdad was raided by the American army, they found a copy of David Irving's Hitler's War on his bedside reading table. Yes, and I've often wondered, is that just a standard smear that the Washington Post drags out every time they want to get at me? Because the same thing was found in General Noriega's bedroom in Baghdad, in Panama City. And so General Noriega, and the third case too, I forget who it was, but he too was obviously found reading this forbidden book, which basically tells you how you defeat a powerful invading army. You've got to have courage. And I'm not saying the partisans didn't have courage, because they were Himmelfahrts commander, as the Germans say, a suicide unit, basically. They had no hope of surviving. But the partisans, that was what Himmler's job was, defeating them, not only defeating the partisans as they rose after Stalin's famous speech of July the 6th, 1941, calling on the whole Soviet population to rise in the rear of the advancing German hordes. But Himmler also acted preemptively. He said, we'll round up everybody who might become a partisan. All the Jews were rounded up, all the Bolsheviks, the communists, and all the local municipal leaders, everybody who might form partisan units sometime a month or two from now. They were taken into the woods and shot. And that was the job of the Einsatzgruppen. They had basic jobs, the Einsatzgruppen and the Einsatzkommandos with their rolling mobile units, their flying squads. The Einsatzkommando, basically a unit of 10 jeeps with Sicherheitsdienst, security service men in the SD uniform, and a truck carrying the ammunition, and another truck carrying a chow wagon carrying the food for them. And they would roll from city to city, and all the people had been rounded up already by the units in the city and being held in local prison. And the pits had been dug out already, and I've seen some of the records in the Moscow archives. You're told that you will arrive in such and such a town at 10 o'clock in the morning. The following day you will begin operations. You will find that 3 pits have already been dug out by local labour, all ready for you. And your unit will work then, carry out the work operations throughout the following day. At 1 hour intervals, they will leave 10 by 10 by 10 by 10. One man will set aside, hand out the ammunition. It's all spelled out in typical army orders. And that's the job. It was a police operation, which I suppose in wartime is legal, because you know that if you fight in plain clothes with a gun in your hand, then you're what's called a partisan or Fremdführer, and you're liable to be executed straight away. But then later on, Himmler has to explain to his SS generals on October the 6th, 1943, in a speech, he said, a lot of you don't understand why we didn't just kill the Jewish men. We also eventually started killing all the Jewish women and children too. He says, obviously I had to do that. That's the reason. Because otherwise they're going to come back 2 generations' time and take revenge on us. So we had to do the job. If the job's to be done, it has to be done properly. This audience of silent SS Gruppenführer in Poznan. And I'll be coming back to that in a minute, about that speech he made. We know he made it. We've got the actual wire recordings of him talking. We've got the text of him speaking. So what happened in phase 2 of what I call the police operations was pretty ugly. And it probably accounted for about 1 million people in those pits behind the advancing German armies, with the full consent and agreement and approval of the German military commanders, the army group commanders, because it kept their backs, looked after their backs. And so they approved it. War is ugly. We killed an awful lot of women and children in the war too. But then we come to phase 3, which is more pragmatic and more political and ideological. That's when Himmler began rounding up all the Jews in Poland, city by city by city, Warsaw, Lublin and the rest, and sending them to the killing centers. The Operation Reinhardt, this was Operation Reinhardt. And eventually not just the Polish Jews, but also from other areas where there were large Jewish concentrations, Amsterdam, Holland, France, some they were just sent to these killing centers too. And it went on and on and on. Began in the spring of 1942. They were sent to these 4 camps, Treblinka, Lublin, or Majdanek, that's the suburb of Lublin, Sobibor, and Belzec. Some large, some small, all equally lethal. It began in the spring of 1942 and ended as the man in charge of Operation Reinhardt proudly reported to Himmler in a letter at the beginning of October 1942. He said, "I formally announce the completion of Operation Reinhardt, mission completed," rather like your George W. Bush. Except, of course, neither was completed because then Germany invaded Poland, Warsaw, Hungary, and found that Hungary had 500,000 Jews, so they had to start all over again.
So did Hitler know about Reinhardt?
Good question. We're going to come to that. Good point. We've got proof of what he knew and what he didn't know, and who was responsible, and what he knew and when he knew it, which is all the modern phraseology. We can put numbers on Operation Reinhardt. That is what really staggers me. Not just numbers have been told us by all the Jewish wise guys, but numbers have been extracted from the code breaking. This code breaking. Code breaking, unfortunately, once again, is not wall to wall. You're picking up distant messages over 2,000 miles broadcast by military guys who are using unfamiliar equipment and wartime primitive equipment and being picked up by similar equipment in Britain by teenagers or 20-year-old girls working with the radio monitoring posts, and they miss an awful lot. Or radio static breaks in and breaks out the message. And one advantage is the messages were never sent in whole one piece, because one of the rules of code breaking is you don't have long messages. Long messages are very easy to, or they're easier to break the code of. You've got enough material to work on sent in the same key. So you're not allowed to send more than 150 characters per message, which is like tweeting. Isn't it? I'm told you can't do more than 150 characters in a tweet. But the same in the code breaking. So sometimes you would get just the first 2 lines of a message. The rest was lost in static. Or you'd get the first PERT, the first one, tweet, and then a gap, you'd miss the second one, and then you'd pick up the third message. First one here is quite interesting. Top state secret, Geheime Reichssache. Geheime Reichssache is the highest German security classification in the war. It means top Reich secret. And we know that everything connected with what is now called the Holocaust, which is a word I don't use, was stamped top state secret. Sometimes all you've got is the word top state secret, and the whole page beneath it has been chopped out in some of Goebbels' papers because it was top state secret. But the line above it had been stamped top state secret. Or you have the initial GRS, Geheime Reichssache, in the registration number, which is the clue that this was top state secret. Because it was really very important. And here, this first one that we pick up is top state secret. And I hoped that this page was a fake. I hoped it was, but let me say straight away it isn't. I'm 100% certain it's authentic. The reason I thought it might be fake was that there's got about 6 or 7 internal discrepancies. The Germans were very nitpicking about the way they sent signals. They had to follow a precise pattern, a precise order, with no variations. There was a civil service procedure for sending wireless messages. It had to have a registration number. It had to say clearly who was being sent by, who being sent to, what the security was. They had to have a log number, all these things, and the time and the date on it, and reference number. And some of those are missing on this. The first one, in fact, is very significant. It's a top state secret to the Reichssicherheitshauptamt. Reichssicherheitshauptamt, that means Homeland Security Agency. That's curious, isn't it? What a coincidence. Reich, the Homeland Security, Sicherheitshauptamt, Homeland Security Agency. I sometimes wonder if the guy who dreamed up the Homeland Security Agency wasn't a bit of a mischief maker. I thought, I'm going to use exactly the same title that Heydrich had for his agency and see who spots it. Well, we spotted it. To be sent to the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, to be handed to SS Colonel Eichmann. Oh, Adolf Eichmann, the big name, the guy who was kidnapped by the Israelis and executed, hanged in 1963. I got all his papers, or most of his papers from Argentina. After the end of a meeting like this, somebody came out with a big brown paper package. He said, we think these are in the right hands when we give them to you. They are very interesting, they're his memoirs. But you don't expect to find that. In fact, in all these 43 volumes, I didn't find a single other reference to Eichmann of all people. That's made me first wonder. My trained brain then began to think, that's a bit curious, what a coincidence, the big name. Then, as I told you, in the archives you're reading about unimportant people writing to unimportant people about unimportant things. And here's a two-line message in which we already got top state secret and Adolf Eichmann all in just 2 lines. That's the first thing they say, wait a minute, hello, Achtung. Okay, but it's genuine. Actually, for a time I wrote to the archives in Britain. I have good relations with them. Same with the Holocaust Museum archives, I'm on good terms with them. And the one in Britain, I said, would it be asking too much if I asked you to consider carrying out forensic tests on this document? On the paper, the ink, the binding, the glue, the typewriter, just to see if it's genuine or not, because it just occurs to me, for example, it's page 2 of a 5-page series of intercepted messages, and yet it's been bound out of sequence. In the bound volumes, it's page 2, and then page 1, 3, 4, and 5, as though somebody kind of slipped it in while no one's looking. Then we come to the main telegram, Howard, the second one. Underneath it, we got it's paragraph 13 and paragraph 15 in this series of intercepted telegrams in the 43 volumes. I didn't find this. I'm not taking the credit for finding this. The credit goes to a British unofficial historian, or what the Germans sneeringly call a hobby historian. Okay, I'm a hobby historian. And hobby historian Steve Tyers found this where all the conformist historians have missed it. He's the one who found it. And he also found the second one referring to this one with exactly the same data in it, which proves that this one therefore is genuine, because the other one was somewhere totally different in the archives. So it's not a post-war fake, I'm sorry to say. And I always said, if this document is genuine, it's a terrible black eye for the extreme revisionists who said that nothing at all happened to the Jews. If, on the other hand, it's fake, it's a terrible black eye for the Jews who had to resort to faking documents to make their case. Well, the short answer is it's genuine. It's a black eye for us, to a certain extent. And I tell people like this, please listen to this, because it'll stop you from shooting your mouth off and overreaching. There's a lot in the Holocaust story that is fake. A lot of the numbers are fake, like the one I told you about in Riga, where you do the math. But a lot of the ugly part of the story is true. First, here's the telegram. Top state secret, addressed to the commander of security police, to be handed to SS Colonel Heim in Krakow, the second city in Poland. Subject, 14-day report on Operation Reinhardt. Whoa, this is horse's mouth speaking directly to us. They spell Reinhardt wrongly, but that may just be the British typists who got the type. They spelled it just with a T. If it was named after Reinhard Heydrich, then it would be spelled just with a D. But Operation Reinhardt, in fact, was spelled with a DT at the end, because it was named after another man. It was named after Fritz Reinhardt, who was the Deputy Minister of Finance in Germany, because the whole of Operation Reinhardt began originally, or its core was actually a plundering operation. The Jews who were being sent east to a new life were valuable not for the brains they had or the people they were or symphonies they were going to compose or the junk art they were going to paint or whatever. They were valuable for the gold teeth and their jewellery and the fine fur coats they had been persuaded to bring with them. I'm sorry to say that. It was a financial operation, and every now and then a report went to Himmler of how many kilograms of gold had been harvested, how many wonderful fountain pens, how many gold watches, how many jewels, all the rest of it. And the numbers for 1942 and 1943 are approximately the same, indicating the same number of people were processed. And I'm using the word because in this intercepted telegram he gives the numbers of the people. But he doesn't tell us what he's talking about, and that's maybe why the British analysts missed the significance of this 10-line intercept, that he's talking here about Jews who are being processed in the 4 camps. It says here the figures for the last 14 days of 1942, last 14 days, and he gives the figures for T, S, L, and B. Treblinka, Sobibor, Lublin, and Belzec. It's really reasonable to assume that, because that was the 4 camps in Operation Reinhardt. And then, having given the 2-week figures, he then gives that overall figure so far, up to the last day of 1942, and I'll give you those figures now. L 24,733. B, what was it? 434,508. S, that's Sobibor, 101,370. T, 71,355. In fact, that's a mistake. The operator has either missed out one digit at the end or that's not been heard by the British monitors. The actual figure, to make the total correct, is 713. There's not a 5 missing at the end. The actual total for T Treblinka was 713,555. And then he says altogether the total is, for this period, 1,274,166. Very interesting, very significant figure. Yes.
Now, you said that's for 2 week total?
No. I said that he also gives the individual figures for the last 2 weeks, but then he gives the overall figures since Operation Reinhardt began until December 31st, 1942, which is 11 days before this telegram. He sent this telegram. The person who sent the telegram was a man called SS Colonel Hermann Höffler. And he was the guy who actually headed the Operation Reinhardt desk in the office of a much more sinister, murderous figure called Odilo Globocnik. You've all heard of Eichmann, but you never heard of Odilo Globocnik. He was the guy, the mastermind behind Operation Reinhardt. We've got a lot of intercepted messages from or about him, decoded by the British. One in which he sends a message to Berlin, rather like the other guy saying, can I have 12 of those magnificent Finnish submachine guns? Globocnik sends a message saying, I need to have 4 bucket excavators. What did he need an excavator for? A dragline excavator. Well, just possibly he needed it for digging anti-tank trenches, just possibly. There's other possible explanations of what he needed the pits for. But it's again how maddening decoding single messages is. He doesn't say, I need these excavators because. He just says quite bluntly, I need the excavators. Quick spot. And we intercepted a message we intercepted 2 vital messages in October 1943. One of them on October the 7th, 1943, which I found. And it leapt out of the page of that 43 volumes to me because it had the word Sobibor in it, one of the 4 camps. And the message says, 700 Jews have broken out of the concentration camp of Sobibor and are to be rounded up immediately without fail and brought back. It is believed that they're trying to flee across the borders across the Bug River, which is 5 miles away, into the Ukraine. And they've got to be brought back at all costs. Maddening. Again, it doesn't tell us what was going on in the camp at Sobibor. However, it does confirm there was a camp at Sobibor, which now if you go there, and those of you who come on this tour, you'll see it. Just a bald patch in a forest with a little museum hut, and all they actually found there was one bent tin cup and about a foot long of barbed wire buried in the sand, because Himmler ordered every vestige of that camp removed and swept away when the whole thing was over, so that nobody would ever find anything. And if it wasn't for that intercepted telegram, we wouldn't even know that Sobibor existed. There's a photograph of me standing outside the old rusting train station sign of Sobibor, which was there when I first went there 5 years ago. But last year we went there, this brand new European Union conform kind of Autobahn kind of Sobibor sign. They're completely destroyed. But there's other things there. If you go and look, there's the little ramshackle railway platform specially built for these trains that were shunted into the platform and unloaded. That is there about 100 yards, and the 200 yards back down the tracks you can see the little green painted house villa, which is where the commandant Franz Stangl lives. That's still there. There's an air raid charter there in the garden. So this is a crucial document, except of course it doesn't tell us what the figures refer to, or what actually the TS, L and B are. We can surmise to 900% certainty, 98% certainty that this was those 4 sites, the Reinhardt sites, because it says this is Operation Reinhardt, top state secret again, the same high classification. But we've got a much better source which confirms that this is the Jews he's talking about, which is why the British didn't spot this when they were analyzing these documents. To them it was just interesting. They were puzzled about, what is this Operation Reinhardt? Is it going to be some big offensive somewhere, or like Operation Heinrich and Operation Hamburg and the other anti-partisan operations? That's what they were obviously thinking, and then they get these odd numbers being thrown into it. Sobibor 0 in the last 2 weeks. Why is that? That kind of thing. Well, this is 11th of January 1943 that signal was broadcast, and we decoded it in the next week. Didn't make head or tail of it, so it went into the bound volumes. But simultaneously, Heinrich Himmler has contacted his chief statistician, which is why these figures are being sent for. Himmler has a chief inspector of statistics called Dr. Richard Korher, who's a trained university statistician. I don't know if you know any statisticians. They're strange people, rather like accountants. I always know at this point if there's an accountant who's present, obviously. Okay, so an accountant is completely uninterested in human life. Somebody said an accountant is somebody who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. Right? And oh, you're an accountant. No, you're looking grim. I warn you that if people interrupt my train of thought, we get the spittoon joke, and that's a really disgusting joke.
I'm going to hold my questions until...
No, we're going to have a discussion period afterwards. God willing. No, Himmler contacted his chief statistician, Richard Korher, a guy I knew. And he said, Dr. Korher, I want you to draw up a 10-year report, because we've been in power now for nearly 10 years. In January 30th, 1933, it is 10 years. And I want you to draw up a 10-year report on the first 10 years of the final solution of the Jewish problem as a statistician. Very interesting. Korher worked on it for 2 months because statisticians, they like numbers. If you fed numbers, you feed on them as a statistician. You can do things with numbers. You can operate on them. You can compare them. You can have sliding scales, compare 1 year's numbers with the next year's numbers. You can have histograms and pie charts and graphs, and you can do wonderful operations with numbers. And that's what Korher did. He operated for 2 months on this. And Eichmann wrote in his memoirs the stuff I got in Argentina. He said this guy Korher kept on badgering me for numbers. And he kept on driving me nutty. He kept on coming back and asking for numbers. One of the numbers he got, obviously, was this Korher, this Höfler telegram. Korher writes in his 17-page report, he says, when we came to power back in 1933, there were 17 million Jews in the world. Now, there are about, at that time, 1933, there were about 10 million living in Europe, Jews. Now, there's about 4 million Jews living in Europe. And then the statistician kicks in. He said, the reason for this discrepancy is simple. Lots have emigrated. And then the real statistician, the pure statistician, right? Well, like pure mathematics, that kicks in. A kind of little thing on his shoulder says, and not only have they emigrated, but the ones who emigrated are old. The ones who emigrated are young and childbearing. The ones who stayed behind in Europe are old and geriatric, and the kind of person you see on a Zimmer frame walking down the streets in Miami in the old days, and nowadays too. No, he doesn't say that about Miami, but that's the point he makes. He says they're beyond childbearing age. So that skews the statistics, makes the discrepancy even more glaring. And not only that, says Dr. Korher, but of those who remained, we've subjected 1.274,166 to special treatment in the camps in occupied Poland. That's the same 7 digits. He's talking about Jews, so we don't no longer wonder what Höfler's talking about in the decode. Korher says we've subjected 1,274,166 Jews to special treatment, Sonderbehandlung, in the camps in the Generalgouvernement, occupied Poland. A very ugly sentence indeed when you think about it. Is subjecting something to some kind of treatment in the camps seems rather terminal. And Himmler spots that straight away, and he writes a reprimand to Korher. He says, Dr. Korher, excellent report, very well done. I'm supposed you learn as a manager, always start off a nasty letter with a word of praise, a word or two of praise. Excellent report, well done, old chap. One thing, though, you do realize this report is designed to be shown to the Führer, Adolf Hitler. So I'm going to ask you to write it shorter, please, about 10 pages. Oh, and that sentence, I want you to change the wording slightly to read 1.274,166 has been channeled through the camps in occupied Poland, further east. Notice the difference in tone there. It's no longer something nasty happening in the camps, whatever Sonderbehandlung is, which is special treatment. It's something rather pleasant happening. They've been durchgeschleust, literally sluiced through the camps in occupied Poland. Further east, they're now enjoying their new life, as the Führer has been led to believe. And he sends this report to the new chief of the Gestapo, who succeeded Reinhard Heydrich. He tells Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the guy's name, he says, this report will be excellent for camouflage purposes. He actually writes that. I've got the letters. It's in the Stanford University Library. Excellent for camouflage purposes. Because it's going to be shown to Hitler. He mustn't be told. And now we begin to close in on the question that you asked about how much was Hitler told. We know the answer to that, which is the answer probably 0. I know that from all Adolf Hitler staff, all his secretaries and private secretaries and everyone, his adjutants, everyone who was with him day after day after day, orders to stand by him at his elbow throughout every conference, like Richard Schulze, who was the SS adjutant assigned to stand next to Hitler. And I asked him on television in the David Frost program one evening, I said, how much was actually discussed about the final solution in your presence? And you have told us that you had to be present through every conference that Hitler had with Himmler and anybody else throughout the Holocaust period, October 1942, right through to the end. I answered Richard Schulze on the David Frost program, not a word was discussed about this in my presence, ever. It was never discussed in Hitler's presence. It gets worse. Karl Wolff, SS General Karl Wolff, who is a rather creepy character, I think. SS General Karl Wolff, very handsome, aristocratic blonde. He's always hovering in the background of the photographs with Himmler. SS General Karl Wolff. He described to me, and also in various manuscripts after the war, confidential manuscripts, he said once in the summer of 1944, he went into Himmler's room in the bunker at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell him it was time really to pack up for the night. Typical Himmler, working far into the night, right through the night, and he wanted the chief to watch out and to look after himself and go to bed. And he blundered into the room because the door was not locked, and he finds Himmler sitting at the table with his head sunk in his hands, a picture of abject depression. And he says, "What's biting you, Herr Reichsführer?" Himmler doesn't look up for a time, and then he does look up and, almost sobbing, he says, "What's biting me? I'm doing something that the Messiah of the coming 2,000 years must never find out about, so that his reputation remains pure for all time." Well, it's obvious what he's talking about. He's talking about Hitler, because Himmler always regarded Hitler as being the Messiah of the coming 1,000 or 2,000 years. And he's talking about the Holocaust. Karl Wolff actually says in his rather mendacious manuscripts afterwards, I didn't realize what Himmler was talking about at that time, but now, of course, I realize. He's a bit of a liar. I've got a document here. The German Minister of Transport writing a letter to Karl Wolff, none other. There we have it. This document alone sufficed to put Karl Wolff behind bars in the 1960s. You see, Himmler, after Operation Reinhardt has begun in a kind of halting fashion in the spring of 1942, Himmler's finding out that these truckloads, trainloads of Jews are backed up all the way down the railway lines because the whole procedure is taking too long. He's imagined it would be done quite simply. Get rid of them. No, they're backed up all the way down the railway lines in Poland, all the way back from the Reinhardt sites. And he tells Karl Wolff, find out what the delay is on the railway lines, Eastern Railways. The Minister of Transport replies to Karl Wolff in these terms on 28th of July 1942. He says, "Dear Comrade Wolff, referring to our telephone conversation of July the 16th, I'm informing you of what the Directorate of Eastern Railways has told us about this delay in Krakow." And then it comes the quotation, the paragraph, what the Director of Eastern Railways has actually said for the benefit of the SS. "Since the 22nd of July, every day a train with 5,000 Jews aboard has gone from Warsaw via Malkinia to Treblinka." Now we're getting some numbers. In addition, twice a week we're sending a train with 5,000 Jews from Przemyśl to Belzec. That's the second camp. Eastern Railways is in permanent contact with the security forces in Krakow. This is declared, has given their approval for the transports from Poland via Lublin to Sobibor, that's the third camp, to be halted at Lublin until the reconstruction of the railway lines have been completed, which will be in about October. I mean, Karl Wolff, he said, I didn't know what he said. Obviously, he knows exactly what's happening here. These are the 3 sites which he has helped Himmler to reconnoiter and presumably supervised the construction work that went on there deep in the forests. And the transport minister has given him some figures. And Himmler writes a very nice letter back to the Minister of Transport, Ganzmüller, saying, "Dear Herr Minister, I'm delighted to hear that every week, every day, trainload of 5,000 of the chosen people is being sent from Warsaw to Treblinka. Not much doubt there about what he's talking about and what he knows. That's Karl Wolff. I think that document surfaced relatively late. They're all genuine. I'm satisfied all these documents I'm reading to you are authentic. There's no question of any of them having been faked. So that in outline, it gives you a pretty broad brush picture of the numbers of people that have been swept up in this huge tragedy, mindlessly. I've got another telegram here from the security police in Riga. They've written to one of the Einsatzkommando chiefs, one of the commanders of the Einsatzkommando, which is the tactical unit actually carrying out the operations, a man called Colonel Jäger, SS Colonel Jäger. And the telegram, which I've got here somewhere, it comes from the Moscow archives. It's a telegram captured by the Russians from Riga, which is where a lot of the stuff was left behind by the Germans. I've got it here somewhere, you can look it afterwards if you want. It says, please tell us, the subject of the telegram is executions, dated February the 2nd, 1942. Executions. Please give us an immediate report on how many executions you carried out since the start of Operations Barbarossa. That's about 7 months. Divided up into A, Jews, B, partisans, C, communists, D, mentally ill, E, others, and again divided up into women and children, how many of women and children are concerned, and what the overall totals are. And I've got Jäger's handwritten draft reply. Obviously, eventually it was sent by teleprinter back to Riga. The draft reply gives the figures. Overall total, 132,000. Very strange. If you break it up, there's 110,000 or thereabouts Jews, 1,000 communists, 54 partisans. I mean, those figures, when you stand back and look at them, they don't bear any real relationship with what we know is. I mean, how many of those Jews were communists? How many of those communists were Jews? And only 54 partisans were actually executed. That all sounds odd. It begins to sound as though the numbers might just be kind of made up. And rather like Vietnam, Viet Cong body counts. The same kind of thing. You have to get a bit suspicious when you see numbers like that. And then he says, of these, the overall total is 132,417, I think. And of these, 30,000 women, and no, 50,000, he gives the figure, the exact number, how many women, and 33,000 were children. That is disturbing. 33,000 children killed by the SS in 7 months. It's about as many children as we killed in Dresden, burned them alive in 2 hours in 1945. The Bomber Command. People forget this. They write history as though it's in a vacuum, out of context. Even so, must have taken some doing, put it like that. And it begins to suggest to you that the numbers, the ballpark figures are about right. Up to 1 million killed in the police operations, I think, in the shooting into the pit operations up to Barbarossa and after Barbarossa. Operation Reinhardt, 1.25 million in 1942 and the same number in 1943. That's 2.5 million, so you've got something like 3.5 million straight away. And we're not even talking about Auschwitz, where virtually nothing happened. Auschwitz now is the parade horse of the Holocaust movement. And the reason for that is simple. Auschwitz has been turned now into a huge, glitzy theme park with chrome and frosted glass and glass walkways and wonderful lettering everywhere and special designs, and they're constantly working to rebuild it. In Treblinka too, they're rebuilding. When we went to Treblinka in September, I noticed just across down one of the lanes, you could see them rebuilding frantically a watchtower there, which they felt they rather needed. But Auschwitz, if you go there now, well, Auschwitz, the reason why they picked on Auschwitz is because it's convenient. It's only an hour from an international airport, Krakow. And it's got buildings. You can show people row upon row of red brick buildings which existed since the turn of the century. And an execution wall. Every time I go to the execution wall, I put flowers there because some genuine heroes, resistance fighters, they were executed at that execution wall. All the commanders, all the principal officers of Auschwitz, this is the point, were put on trial by the Poles when the war was over. The communist judge, famous judge called Jan Sejm. And you have to remember that this Polish court in 1947 had Auschwitz had the evidence, it had the documents, it had the entire archives, it had all the principal culprits, had everybody to question. And on the final day of the trial, when half of them were sentenced to death and hanged on the following day, the judges, in their judgment, which you will find on my website, actually a verbatim newsreel, they said these 22 men were responsible for the running of this cruel concentration camp, Auschwitz, in which during the war years up to 300,000 people of all nations died. Not killed, but up to 300,000. What happened to the 4 million? The original memorial in Auschwitz, 4 million, which has now been replaced by an identical size and shape memorial, fits into the same slot in the ground, to 1.2 million. They invent these figures.
How can you go from 4 million to 1.2?
Well, they had to, because the communist government had been overthrown in Poland and been replaced by a normal westernized government, and eventually the game was going to be up. And so they decided we better cut our losses while we can. But even so, they didn't come down to the original courtroom figure of 300, up to 300,000, including all those who had died in the hideous typhus plagues, which we know from code breaking had wiped out hundreds of thousands. Yes?
I was sure the Germans kept meticulous records of how people would die. In Auschwitz, it was like 300,000. About that.
People normally, but then the argument against that is they didn't regard the Jews as people. And they were just dealt with kind of with the left hand. So that is a plausible argument and difficult to contest, except on the math basis and say, well, how do you do it? And the math basis is really a real killer here because, for example, although Operation Reinhardt ended in October 1943 formally, in March 1944 the Germans invaded Hungary, and that was another 500,000 Jews. What happened to them? Well, Professor Van Pelt, he came and gave evidence for Lipstadt in the Lipstadt trial, and I had him in the witness box, and I cross-examined him, and I said, how many were we talking about? He said, about 450,000. I said, what happened? Oh, they were sent to Auschwitz and liquidated, he said. I said, yes, that's the official version now, but can we discuss that, please? What period of time was this? He said, that was in the spring of 44. I said, it was May 44, wasn't it? The last 3 weeks of May, 1944. He said, that's right. So I said, now you're telling the court that the Sonderkommando in Auschwitz was able to process 450,000 Jews in the space of 3 weeks. Is that what you're telling the court? And he realized the trap he had fallen into. But he had to say yes, of course. And I said, Professor Van Pelt, have you any idea what 450,000 Jews weighs? We don't think of them in terms of weight, how much meat it was. The answer is about 40,000 tons. Have you any idea how long it would take to do that, and how long and how much coal it would take to cremate 450,000 people? Going on your own figures for the crematory, it would take about 20,000 tons of coke or coal, wouldn't it? Here are the air photographs of Auschwitz I showed you, taken in that month, May 1944. Can you show the courtroom where the endless trains, coal trains, were bringing these supplies of coal to the crematoria are? Or if they were buried in pits, have you any idea what volume would be required? Well, I mean, it's the math again, and the answer is it would take 40,000 cubic meters, huge pits, to bury them. And I said, just one final point. Can we look at the air photograph again? There's a little building just in the northwest corner of Crematorium 2, where, according to you, they were gassed and cremated. Can you tell me, the court, where that building is? Very reluctantly said, yes, that's the coal bunker. I said, will you take it from me if I tell you that coal bunker is about 8 or 10 feet square? Have you any notion of how many tons of coal you can get in a coal bunker 12 feet square? Yes. I mean, I said all this on a visit to Auschwitz, actually. Pointed to the actual remains of that building. It's still there, the coal bunker. And the Polish guide, official guide, came right, a woman in a long, floor-length black dress, I remember, a dramatic hat, came rushing over and said, turn that camera off. You are not allowed to discuss questions like this. This is holy ground. So on the basis of holy ground, you're not allowed to ask how many tons of coal you can get in a coal bunker. But I'm not saying nothing happened to them, but I do know, because I've gone the extra mile. In Britain, we have the entire stenographic records of the conferences held by Field Marshal Erhard Milch in the German Air Ministry. He was deputy to Hermann Goering. Verbatim conference reports, about 40 volumes of them, and I've read all those. And after a time in early 1944, you get the problem of the Hungarian Jews who are now being brought into Germany, and all the able-bodied Jews are going to be put to work building these huge, gigantic underground aircraft construction factories in Bavaria. Gigantic caverns are being excavated and roofed over with concrete. 200,000 Jews is the figure given in those conferences alone for building those factories. So they didn't end up in Auschwitz. But people who ask these awkward questions, they get sent to prison. I can name one or two people, well, I can name one person who's been sent to prison for that. Solitary confinement. A year and a half, and I can recommend solitary confinement. If you're a writer, good stuff. You're being fed at Austrian taxpayer expense, 3 meals a day, awkward times, that's true, awful food, but apparently it's balanced nutrition. On Saturdays you had just a lump of cheese the size of a matchbox and one raw onion. That was your Saturday nutrition. But I can recommend it, it's wonderful. You have 6 inches of armor plate between you and the criminals of the outside world, so you're completely safe. And you no risk of visits from bailiffs or lawyers or wives or children. Can I have the pocket money? Whatever it is, you can just concentrate your mind on writing. And I did. I wrote 4,000 pages thanks to the Austrian taxpayers. So Austrian taxpayers, I'm very grateful to you. So there we are.
Do you have the internet? You have access to the internet?
No. Had I been convicted, you've got to remember, I wasn't convicted. At the time, I was still on remand as an appeal prisoner with an appeal outstanding. And until then, you are not a convict. And as a remand prisoner, you have much worse conditions than as a convicted prisoner, in Austria anyway. If you're a convicted prisoner, then you can ask for a computer. And you are supplied, you have to buy a brand new computer, which is sent direct from the factory to you, so there's nothing on it. They think of everything. Yeah. These various things. Yeah.
But I'm still a little unclear. As far as Reinhardt goes, there were 4 camps, Treblinka, Soto, and the others. Those cables suggest that about 2.5 million. Now, how were they killed? You mentioned some shootings and stuff. Was there any
you're going to go below the knee with trivial questions, and I admit I'm going to ignore in my Himmler biography. I'm ignoring all the trivial questions like was it carbon monoxide or dioxide, was it diesel engines or petrol engines, were they shot or were they poisoned, what happened to the bones, a lot of kind of lower order questions, contributory questions which people sometimes bring up. And I agree that if you're an addict as I am too of the First 48 or CSI Miami or these other programs, you tend to ask all the forensic questions. But unfortunately from these decodes I am satisfied now that we have evidence of the numbers being processed. And I'm not going to say it's an obscenity to start looking at details about carbon monoxide or carbon monoxide. I'll leave that to the people who are interested in execution techniques. I'm interested.
Could you even say they were gas chambers compared to shootings?
That's what it sounds like to me. Most of these people were executed.
In the pits they were executed by shooting. In the nape of the neck, which is kind of Soviet style too. But then eventually, I think they ended up with morale problems with people actually doing it. It was coarsening the entire SS force who were getting involved in this. And so they decided to use the methods that they've been using for euthanasia too, which is various toxic gases. What the name of the toxic gas used was, I don't know, but I have to admit that whole debate about the cyanide gas and the use in Auschwitz and so on was what brought me into this argument in the first place. I was required to give evidence as an expert witness in the Ernst Zundel trial. And so for that reason I read the whole of the Fred Leuchter reports. And attached to the Fred Leuchter reports was the forensic laboratory tables on the buildings that Fred Leuchter collected samples from. And the forensic laboratory found no significant trace of cyanide compounds. And that is what got me very interested, shall we say, because I went to university, I studied chemistry, and I know it's an exact science, and if there's no significant trace of cyanide in the walls of the gas chambers, so-called, then there has to be an explanation for it. They've got the wrong buildings. It's one.
But they very well could have been 6 million Jews that were processed by the Nazis.
Well, we're in the ballpark. And that's why I think revisionists make a mistake, questioning those numbers. Because that's where eventually, and also I can understand the Jews being deeply aggrieved that these horrible numbers are being questioned by revisionists, when in fact what they should be questioning is was Adolf Hitler told? Was it an act of the German state, the head of state? I mean, this is a question I've been asking since my Hitler biography came out in 1975. And this is why this whole vicious campaign has been launched against me for the last 20 years, because I'm asking the really crucial question. Was this an operation carried out by individual Germans, well-intentioned but for the wrong reasons? who are trying to purify their nation and get rid of all the Jews, which might well happen in the United States in 20 or 30 years' time, I think, because I see everything shaping up that way too. And I warned them this. I'd warned them this. I say you're now in the same positions of power and influence in the banks, in the media and the newspapers and everything else that you guys were in the Weimar Republic, which led to your misfortune there. And so I plead with people to stop questioning those numbers and start looking at how these things happen. And the Jews should, in the first place, immediately start asking themselves the all-important two-word question, why us? It's no happenstance that the Jews have found themselves hated, murderously hated, year after year, country after country, millennium after millennium. No sooner have they arrived in one country and forced them within 50 years, they have to flee for their lives all over again. And they don't ask themselves what they're doing. I know that I'm not liked as a historian, and I know the reasons why. I know what would make me very liked. That is just start conforming, swimming with the tide. But something in my makeup makes me throw up rather than do that. I'd rather take the knocks. They never ask themselves, why us? They never ask, is there any connection between Lehman Brothers and Dick Fuld? Dick Fuld making a $500 million bonus in 2008, the year that he brought the entire world economy crashing down, and millions of ordinary people losing their savings and their homes and their mortgages and everything just because of this extraordinary fabric of basically Jewish-designed financial malpractices. And I understand that there was a United States-wide poll taken by one of the major newspapers, Washington Post or New York Times, on people asking about 2008, who did they blame, and 68% of the people questioned said it was the Jews. And I thought, that's an extraordinary number. If I was a Jew, I'd be run straight away to the nearest travel agency. I would be getting the hell out of here. Yes. And I thought, that's not what I thought about the American people. I thought most of the Americans don't give us tuppence for they're just interested in where their next Big Mac is going to come from, or their Whopper Burger.
So, David, do you think that a main push for the Holocaust as it is today, the way it's reported by them, was in part to protect the banking structure that financed Hitler?
I think that is the reason for them going after people like us, because we also ask the subsidiary, ancillary questions, like who was really to blame for the depression in 2008. Look at all the big names. Look at the big names in the federal banking system, Federal Reserve, this kind of thing. Why are they always Jews? People ask, the big newspapers don't dare ask these questions because they're impolite and bad taste. I'm not notorious for having good taste. I'm the one who said more women died on the back seat of Ted Kennedy's car in Chappaquiddick than ever died in that gas chamber building in Auschwitz, because nobody ever died in that, because the building wasn't even built until 1948. We now know. The Poles admit it was built in 1948, the one they show the tourists. And for saying that, I was fined $10,000 by the German government.
Was there a bigger push in America, let's say because of the Fed and Weishaupt and all those who created it here? Could you say there's more of a push to push the Holocaust in America versus, say, Europe?
The reason that they push, as you call it, this historical episode, is because it comes down like a safety fire curtain in the interval in a theatre in New York or in London. As soon as awkward questions get asked, it's look how they've suffered. I know this because one typical example, on just a one-person level. In Key West, there's a street called Duval Street. That's the main street, like Bourbon Street in New Orleans. That's what every city has one. In Key West, they have 20 T-shirt shops in that one street. All 20 shops are owned by one Israeli family. The local state's prosecutor told me that this family is into money laundering, the drug business, and there's one shop they weren't able to, they investigated all the others, there was one they hadn't. So eventually 3 beautiful girls came up to me, side story, but they came up to me and they said, would I do them a favor? And of course I naturally said yes, and they said, would I go to the shop and get their pay because the Jewish owner had refused to pay them for the 4 weeks they'd been working in there. Well, I said yes, but I went round to the local police and I said, can you lend me a cop tomorrow? Because I'm going to have this rather ugly task to go around to a local Israeli shop manager and ask him to pay several $100 or $1,000 to these girls who've done the work, and he's decided not to pay them. And the cops quite rightly said, Mr. Irving, we'd like to help, but we can't help because this is a civil matter, not a criminal matter. And I said, it may become a criminal matter. And the job of the policeman standing in the background is simply to ensure that there's no breach of the peace. And he said, no. He said, oh, wait a minute. You say this shop on the corner of Southern Street and Duval? I say, yes. Oh, that is the one the state prosecutor has been trying to get his hooks into for a year and a half. Go and see the state prosecutor, a man called Meyer, another Jew, but he was a Brooklyn Jew. When I went to see him an hour later, and this guy Meyer, he said, Mr. Irving, we've had our eyes on that shop and the management for the last couple of years. We hate them, these Israelis. He said, I'm Jewish, I'm from Brooklyn, but the Israeli Jews who are here in Key West, they are the scum. They prey on the tourists, they prey on the cruise liners, they've got all these tricks they do, they run their credit cards 3 times, this kind of thing. And he told me a lot of the tricks they use. The special Hebrew words they shout to each other when they get a victim that they can scam. So he went along, and you'll see the point of this now. The following morning, 9 a.m., we went to the shop for the manager that's there, and they go in, they ask me to wait outside, so he goes in with the cops, and they say, we've got these girls who, you're in deep trouble, the manager's called, because these 3 girls turn out not to have got work permits, then you're going to be fined $10,000 for each. And at this I heard the voice, this whining wail come from the manager. Why are you doing this to me? Why? He's 30 years old. Why are you doing this to me after all we have suffered? Right. And I thought, they've got that phrase in their microchip. I mean, women have in their microchip, they've got this phrase, if you don't know what you've done to upset me, I'm not going to tell you. Right? Jews have this, after all we have suffered and you are questioning my integrity. Right? And that's the answer to your thing. They consider they're entitled to special treatment, and that's, I think, the Nazis actually used that phrase, special treatment, as a bit cynical, saying, well, they want special treatment, they're going to get Sonderbehandlung, special treatment. They won't like it. But I've told this to Jews in university audiences when they come, not like these guys, and start throwing things around. But when they come and ask questions politely at the end, I said, if I was a Jew like you, Professor, then I would be deeply concerned the way things are going in the United States now. This was University of Washington, somewhere. I'm in Moscow, I spoke in Idaho. They were on the Washington side, Washington campus. And I said, you don't seem to realize that, because you don't recognize it, that you are now making exactly the same mistake as the Jews made in the Weimar Republic. And then when everything goes belly up for them and they start boarding the trains heading for the east, they're wondering, why is this happening to us? Why are they doing this to us? Well, the sad thing is that most of the people to whom it happened were totally innocent. They were the innocent small fry. It was the big guys, it was the Dick Fowles who had brought this misfortune on them. I don't think Dick Fowles is going to feel uncomfortable in his skin at present. He's got his $500 million bonus and he went up. He refuses to be interviewed, but the BBC interviewed him. It's quite amusing to watch him. He thought it was going to be a kind of US kind of pussyfooting interview. The BBC went in there with the facts and figures and questioned him. You got $500 million, didn't you? Bonus when you retired from Lehman Brothers.
Lehman Brothers? Yeah,
Dick Fowles, CEO of Lehman Brothers, and he said, no, I don't think that can be true. And the BBC said, well, we know the figures. You got $230,000 as a payment. You got stock options for another $200,000, and then you all the figures, which he then had to admit. The BBC said, so that's it. It is $500 million you got in the 1 year when your machinations brought the whole world economy crashing down. And he refused since then ever to give an interview to anyone.
Yeah, but then Obama gives them all a bailout. Then Obama bails them out.
Obama is a very weak president, unfortunately.
Well, he's controlled. They're all controlled.
He's like a small boy in a toboggan, well, like Harry Truman when he came into office. We all saw Obama cheered him probably from our sofas as he signed those documents on the day he came into office, the first day. I declare that that Guantanamo Bay will be closed in the next 12 months, that there will be no more military tribunals, all these things that were giving the Americans a bad name around the world. And here we are 12 months later, a year and a half later, 2 years later, and he's found out that he's not the guy who really runs the United States. And that what the president says doesn't necessarily go.
How's the guy at Albany with a few months in the Senate gets $16 million from Wall Street and Goldman Sachs? I was $100 million to run for president. I mean, someone like Goldman Sachs loved his vision for America.
Goldman Sachs is getting an equally bad name worldwide. Unfortunately, you're reliant on the American newspapers for the news. The American newspapers do not do the job they used to do.
Yeah, but who owns
They're owned by that.
Well, the New York, now I'm going to annoy you by saying the New York Times is the one you should keep your eye on. They are now turning, and they are becoming a very good and anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli newspaper. The New York Times, of all newspapers, owned by the Sulzbergers, and they're reporting on some of the scandals, like Steve Cohen and the SAC, his big hedge fund operation where he got, I think, $11 billion. And they've closed on him, the New York Times, saying, well, now all his top executives have now been arrested, and they're probably all taking the fifth or pleading for special treatment and pleading to be treated leniently if they all blow the whistle on him. And the New York Times are giving all the wonderful articles they've written about Cohen and various other big guys in Wall Street who have behaved equally badly. The naughty guys, the naughty Jews doing naughty things. The Wall Street, the New York Times is quite an interesting read. And things like you never used to find that there.
Well, yeah,
But now,
that's surprising.
now, as I say, the Jews are not immune when it comes to the pages of the New York Times. They get special treatment.
Can I
See, I think the problem
go back to
is-
the Holocaust for a minute?
Yeah.
I had thought that one of the things that the Holocaust is promoted for is to protect the communists killing all the Russians. They always, in the American mind, when you start talking about mass deaths, immediately
Yes.
people start talking about Hitler.
Yes.
And they skip everything that happened in the USSR.
Yeah. Well, very interesting, partly in that connection, was Putin. A few weeks ago, Putin announced actually to a Jewish audience, he said this thing that the rest of the world doesn't understand is that at the beginning of the Soviet Empire, 85% of the top Bolsheviks were all Jews. And he's talking about hundreds of them, 500 or 600 of them. And fascinating because Putin must have realized that that wasn't going to stay confined within those four walls where he's speaking to a Jewish audience. By the next day it was all over the internet and in the newspapers, quoting Putin as fingering the Jews and reminding the world of their guilt, that they were the ones who provided all the top murderers and the mass murderers and the torturers were all Jews. As Churchill wrote back in 1920, I think, somewhere he wrote that in a London newspaper.
Well, look who financed the Russian Revolution.
And then you've got to wonder why Putin is reminding people of this, what his purpose is.
Right.
And Pat Buchanan has said very interesting. Pat Buchanan wrote an article saying, is Putin one of us?
Yeah.
Meaning a Christian do-gooder.
Right.
Yeah.
I think he is.
Well, he's certainly a very
I think
He's better than Obama.
he's a very clever man indeed. You didn't get to the top position in the KGB by being stupid.
But he's in a corner because financially he's in a bad position. I think he's up against a brick wall right now. I think that's why he had to go into the Ukraine like he did because...
Well, that also is very interesting about how the Americans are behaving badly again. Every time I see mass crowds on the streets, I wonder how much money the CIA paid for this one.
Oh.
They tried a few months ago, and now they're trying again. And very interesting, yesterday, or was it this morning, one of the big Jewish newspapers has revealed a lot of ex-Israeli army people are turning up, running these groups of resistance fighters in the squares of the Ukraine. Yeah.
Nazis
Yeah.
of Ukraine.
Yeah, right. Right. For the EU, ultimately.
Yeah.
No, they're actually, the ultranationalists are, they hate Jews. They're very anti-Jewish. So we got Israelis working for the anti-Semites in Ukraine.
We got our hands all over that.
Well, General Galen, who was the head of the German intelligence service, I remember I translated his memoirs, and I had to go and see him many times. And he said, actually, he wrote one of his reports in 1942. He said, in our liquidation operations against the Jews in the Ukraine, we're having maximum support from the Ukrainian population. And that's another thing they played down. When I went to Belzec the first time, one of the four camps, Belzec, which is where, I think it's 454,000 in 1942. You go there now, and Belzec is about the size of 4 or 5 football fields. And it's been covered completely with a 2-foot thick layer of lava rocks for some reason by the American Jewish Agency. So you can't actually see the site anymore. It's completely covered by this carpet of lava. But I spoke to the local villagers with an interpreter. And the local villager, an old, grizzled old woman, she remembered, oh yes, I remember my father ran the local bakery in this town. And we supplied all the bread to the SS unit at Belgium that were doing all that. So I then said, but what did all the Polish villagers think about what the Germans were doing then? Oh, we were so grateful they were doing that still. Yes, absolutely on the side of the Nazis.
Which one of these books that you've written is this information in?
Oh, that'll be in the Himmler biography, which is coming out this year. The first volume of that, with all these completely unknown documents from the Moscow archives. Very, very interesting. For example, you find out that the SS didn't regard the Jews as an enemy until about 1937. The penny didn't drop. They were keeping their eye on their index cards and everything on the Catholics, the Catholic movement, on the Protestant clergy. That was the second. The third enemy was the Freemasons. Then came, and then the Jews were way down at position number 7 or 8. And it wasn't until the Jews started liquidating isolated Nazis, like the ambassador in Paris, the deputy ambassador in Paris, or the head of the Nazi movement in Switzerland, Wilhelm Gustloff, 1936. So the penny began to drop, and Heydrich says, okay, start keeping index cards on these guys too. And there are very detailed instructions on how to keep the indexes, card indexes. Magnificently kept different card indexes, which just grew and grew and grew, these card indexes. So when the crunch came, it was relatively easy for the SS to go in and find all the Jews, because they had them all in their card indexes. But then also we know from Eichmann's papers, Eichmann was baffled about how much assistance he got from the Jews. A very interesting story in the New York Times again. About 2 years ago, I clipped it out and I've used it. The headquarters of the Jewish community in Vienna was being sold. Everything was being emptied out, and the building was being sold off for this real estate value. And the construction workers emptying the building had found 350 boxes, archive boxes, filled with all the answered questionnaires of all the Jews who were going to be shipped off and emigrated. At that time, they were still emigrating to America and elsewhere. And the question the New York Times asks is, who actually drew up these questionnaires and filed them and made them available to the SS? The Jewish community in Vienna became very tight-lipped. They said they had no idea. But the historian, Raoul Hilberg, so it must have been, in fact, many years ago this happened. He was quoted by the New York Times as saying, well, it's quite obvious that this was the Jewish community, so hand in glove with Eichmann, who was making it so easy for the Jews to emigrate. He cut through all the red tape, which had made it impossible before. Previously, you had to get a passport to emigrate if you were a Jew. And then you had to fill in you had to complete your tax affairs to prove that you didn't owe the German Reich anything. By the time you'd done all the paperwork on that, your passport had expired. You then had to go back and start the whole cycle again. Eichmann found out this maddening business that the Jews were being kicked around from building to building. And he said, we'd taken over the Rothschild Palace in Vienna, my staff and I, and we had everything under one roof, and we cut through all the red tape, and everything was done from one desk to another, and within the space of one visit, they had all the papers and clearance that they needed. And the Jews were so grateful, because not only that, also the penniless Jews who came to us and couldn't afford it, we made the rich Jews pay for them. Robin Hood, he said, and what is the thanks I get for this? That's what he actually writes in the memoirs. What's the thanks I get? Nothing but slime poured over me, and I'm the one who made it so possible for them to emigrate in the first place. And of course, they got him for what he did later on. I think we're going to have at least a 10-minute pause now. First of all, so you can get a drink, coffee or drinks for 10 minutes. We'll have it for 10 minutes. It's what I call a commercial break, because I've come here very heavy laden, and this is your chance for me to sign books and take anything you want to away, and take them please in plastic bags. I've got a special signing pen with me.
And they are back in the restaurant after 9:30. So I have a couple of very quick questions.
Very quick one-word answers. Okay, I'll make it as quick as I can. You may have seen the video, or maybe others in the room have seen it, but there is a video on the internet where a gentleman produces 10 authentic newspapers, American newspapers, that say 6 million Jews.
Okay.
Have you seen that?
Coincidence.
Coincidence, okay.
You can do it with probably any digit or any number you want.
Okay, very good.
Insignificant, yes.
Thank you. A second question. Jerome Corsi wrote a book, indicates Hitler survived, actually made it to Argentina. Any comments about that?
I knew Otto Günscher. He was one of my first people. I knew Otto Günscher was Hitler's chief SS private adjutant. He himself carried Evil Brown body up the staircase. He describes me how Einstein carried his body up the staircase, wrapped in a blanket, with typical brown shoes sticking out the bottom. He said that when he went back downstairs, he discovered that his tunic was smelling of cyanide, almonds. So he deduced that Evil Brown had swallowed cyanide. And he gave me a long description. He actually drew a sketch for me of how the bodies were lying. There's no question at all. First, I'm the only person who ever talked about that. It's a G-U-N-S-H-E. G-U-E-N-S-C-H-E. Winshaw. He died a couple of years ago. He's a very nice upright guy. Stand-up guy. Fabulous. Two more questions then.
Who's going to carry on all this work that you've done?
I'm carrying on. I'm still standing. Yeah, I was talking to the hard text. Yeah, I'm very annoyed. I get more and more emails nowadays from what you me saying, guys writing me saying, I first read your books 41 years ago. That's literally one that I got last week. Okay, next. Yeah. But I'm glad to say a lot of youngsters saying they're no longer reading, which is good.
Can we help you with your scores with the United States?
What?
You've got some trouble with people letting you into the country. Can we help you at all?
One of the biggest problems I've got is if I'm back in the United States, I've got about 10 tons of possessions over here kept in storage, including about 3 tons in global storage.
So that's yes?
Well, it costs money every month to pay for them. And so I will then have to take radical decisions on that. But I'll cross each bridge when I get hurt. I had a lady running a bookstore in Atlanta, but she got out after a year doing that. So I'm running myself to prison. No more seconds.
When you get the rest of your books out, or the ones that haven't been,
you always find all my books will be announced on irvingbooks.com. irvingbooks.com.
See, I pulled that up a number of years ago.
We're still there.
It didn't. I just found out, I think 2 years ago, that you were selling.
irvingbooks.com has all my books and products and talks and everything. It's a very, very good bookstore, which we, after my first bookstore was smashed by hackers in 2009, with very serious damage. It took 6 months to repair that damage. We then rebuilt the bookstore entirely from the ground up, and that's the one you find on the irvingbooks.com. And that will permanently be there, whether I'm in the United States or not. Anything I'm sorry, but it's okay for you guys because you're in the United States. The English hate it, but if they buy a book on that bookstore, they've got to pay postage from the United States. Which ain't cheap. I mean, there is all postage about $60. So they pay $40 for the book and $60 for the postage.
Last thing, I want to try to summarize what I learned just real quickly. I'm probably the slowest guy in the room. But you're not questioning the 6 million Jew number as far as 6 million Jews have died. You're questioning what Hitler knew and also the existence of gas chambers. Do I have it right?
Not entirely right.
Not entirely, okay.
On the numbers, I'm very cautious, but you've seen what numbers are justified.
Okay.
Assuming that the people feeding the numbers into that system were not just doing Viet Cong body count.
Okay, thank you.
Exaggerating their own powers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy it.
Appreciate your time.
I think we should definitely do the math every time somebody comes up with a number or a tax and say, well, is this possible? The answer is no. Probably isn't.
Right.
So there,